All right, everyone, how are you? Welcome to this week's episode of our podcast. It's called Is Breakfast Included? Thanks for stopping by. On the show today, Lisa and I visit with Christopher Holt. Christopher is based out of Dallas, Texas. He has a new album dropping today. It's called Across the Milky Way. We talked a little bit about the seeds of that album when he started recording it and writing it. Also, Christopher is the new guitar player in a band you might have heard of called the Eagles. And we talked a little bit about that, about his current residency at the Las Vegas Sphere. He talked about his other gig with Mike Campbell and the Dirty Knobs. It was a lot of fun getting to know Chris. Let's check it out. Tell everybody who you are.
My name is Christopher Holt, and I'm a musician. I live in Dallas, Texas, and I play with a whole lot of different people, and I do my own thing, and I do session work, and that's kind of my thing. So.
Right on. Anything interesting happened lately with you?
Well, yeah, I joined the Eagles as a guitar player in January. It's something that had been cooking for a little while. I knew Stuart Smith was potentially going to retire, and that I had been called to step in and take his place in the touring band. And I played with Don Henley for about 13 years now. I've been in his solo band a long time. And Don and I have always had a good relationship, and musically, I knew everybody in that band already. A lot of the people that were in the Eagles touring band are also in Don's solo band, and it just seemed like a good fit. So I've been doing that for the past, I guess it would be almost 5 months now.
Right on, man.
And continuing for the foreseeable future, hopefully.
Cool. Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit. Where originally are you from?
I'm from Dallas. That's where I live now, and
born and raised in Dallas.
Yeah, grew up here, and that's home to me. That's how I met Don, because Don has a home here in Dallas too. He's originally from East Texas, and
okay.
So,
and go ahead.
No, was music always the plan for you, or did you ever picture yourself doing anything else?
I think my parents pictured me doing other things. But I pretty much knew I wanted to do music ever since I was a teenager. I first got a guitar when I was 12, and I had been watching MTV for years at that point, wanting a guitar, and I didn't actually convince my parents to get me one until I was 12. And then I spent a few years in my bedroom just trying to make it work, trying to figure out how it worked. And by the time I was 16, I had a band, and I played my first gigs with that band. And at that point, I was like, I don't ever want to do anything else with my life. So I tried my hand at college, and that didn't work out too well. And I was never a music school guy. I am mostly self-taught. Had some good mentors along the way who showed me what I was doing wrong, but mostly self-taught. And yeah, just as soon as I could make a living doing that, I always knew that's what I wanted to do rather than have a real job. I've just still never had a real job.
What did you go to college for?
Originally journalism, and then because I once the shit hits the fan here. Can I say shit? Is that okay?
Oh, absolutely.
Once the shit hits the fan here, and all this goes away, I still imagine that I'll be a writer, writing a book in the woods somewhere in a cabin, So, but journalism was kind of where I thought I would go in college, and then after a couple of years of that, I knew that music was the only thing I was interested in. So I tried to change my major to music, and then I dropped out to go play with a band, and never went back. Yeah. I think my parents thought that was just the end of it, but eventually things started working out for me, and it's just been a series of any career in music is a roller coaster. It's ups and downs, peaks and valleys. But it's been really good for the past couple decades, but the past decade has been exceptionally good. So.
Did anyone else in your family play anything? Or?
No, that's the thing that's very strange. Is I just kind of an anomaly in that sense. but they're all fans of music, and everybody's been very supportive. I mean, once my parents saw that this was not a, a hobby or a fad for me, they got behind me. They knew, and of course now they're thrilled. My parents have been to the Sphere twice. My siblings, my siblings, and all that stuff. It's it's definitely fun to play music. So
did they like that experience?
Yeah, well, and I mean, I know Bernie's been there. So have you been there too?
Yeah, I saw you too when he was working there.
Okay, yeah. So it's unbelievable, and so yeah, my parents were completely floored by that. They just couldn't. I mean, they had to come a second time. They were so they were so wowed by it. So
yeah, and I don't even understand all the technical things that go on behind the scenes. I'm just seeing from my perspective out as a fan.
Yeah. Well, when I first knew when I got the word that I was going to step in and do the Eagles gig, they had me come watch the show from the audience. So I got the chance to see the show a couple of times from the audience to get just to get a visual on like to really understand the scope of the show and see all the content. And the joke is, okay, now that you've seen it, don't ever look at it again.
Yeah.
like just stay focused, because it can be very distracting on stage. It's just, I mean, there's no way to describe that place unless you've been there, and you have, so
Yeah. My experience, when I got the gig with you too, I showed up for rehearsals, and the whole thing was going on for the last week of rehearsals. But walking out, doing my first handoff, walking out, it was hard just not to look and be distracted by what was going on in the moment. So
yeah, you can be very disoriented by it. I've told a few people that I've talked about it with. The opening of the show is particularly tricky for me because there's this big swirling thunderstorm, and I have to walk up the steps with a double neck guitar in my hand, and
oh my gosh.
And then you kind of walk out and you see the audience, and then you see all this crazy stuff going on above you, and it is very easy to get disoriented, and so I have to kind of keep that. I see that light, like where my pedal board is right there, and my microphone, and I'm like, okay, stay focused. Take a deep breath, and it's a daunting task. So,
who were your bands when you were growing up? Who were your interests?
The ones I listened to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good, because I didn't want to have to talk about my high school band. I was like, oh, you don't want. I was like, oh, you don't want to hear those records. I grew up in the MTV era, so it was so much of the new wave, and then the early, pop metal bands that I was listening to when I was 8, 9, 10 years old. But eventually, I got really, so by the time I actually could play guitar a little bit, I fell completely in love with Led Zeppelin. I mean, I was just a Jimmy Page disciple, and I was listening to Pink Floyd, and one of my first bands that I ever loved was Rush. I just loved Alex Lifeson. He's one of my favorite guitar players. And then as I got a little older, in my teenage years, I discovered the Beatles. And once I discovered the Beatles, then it was like, forget about it. That was the end of it, But I just did a total deep dive on 60s and 70s music. That's been my passion my whole life. And I did for years, I used to do these residency gigs as a solo act where I would just be like, try to, stump me. See, all requests, stump me, because I just kind of had this encyclopedic knowledge of 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s pop music. At least stuff that I liked. I mean, it's not like I would, dive into things that I thought were not good, but I had, a pretty wide palette of the stuff that I like. And, I just, the way I look at it now, I just really love old music. So that's what I call old music. It was like a renaissance, pop music that was a renaissance starting in the 50s and 60s. And it's different now. I don't mean to sound like the grumpy old man, but it's just the business is different. The music is different. There's still a lot of great music out there today, but it's a little harder to find. You got to dig for it.
Yeah.
Certainly.
I know that I'm often considered a grump when I say, like, the pop music now, no one's going to be talking about it in 20 years the way we talk about the Beatles or Led Zeppelin, or and that usually makes me come off as the grumpy old man. But I like a lot of it. Like, a lot of it is pretty cool, and some artists are doing something cool, but there's a lot of really good music, like you said, but you got to dig for it. You got to find it.
Well, the ocean is so massive now, and we're all such little fish. Like I've got this album coming out in a couple of weeks, and I didn't like. I've been trying to figure out the self-promotion game. I've been trying to figure out Instagram and all these things, and like that are foreign to me. Like I'm not good with social media, and it's like every 2 weeks you got to have this new single out, and we got to have it's a very difficult course to take.
You got to put yourself out there every.
Yeah, totally. And like I said, I'm older and I'm grumpier about it.
So you said earlier, like, you had some pretty good mentors. Were they local Dallas guys that you?
Yeah, totally.
Because coming from Dallas, there were a lot of cats around that time that were,
Yeah, there was a particular guy, just a brilliant guitar player by the name of Sam Swank, who is still a friend of mine, and he taught me when I was a teenager. We kind of had a very informal thing with lessons. We didn't get together every week, and we didn't always have any sort of agenda. A lot of times I would just show him what I was teaching myself how to play, and then he'd go, no, you're doing that all wrong. Let me show you. And then after a couple of years of him really showing me some tricks and some secrets to the guitar, then he kind of pushed me out the door and just said, dude, go. Run along, play, just go play. And that's what I did. It was just like the whole thing was meet other musicians who are as good or better than you. He was like, don't play down, play up. He's like, a great place to be is if you're the worst player in a really good band. Like, go find a band of really good players and see if you can keep up with them. And that was a good lesson to learn, because you can start a band when you're young and you can have them be your friends, and if you're the best player in the band and you're constantly having to pull them along, it's like that can be very frustrating, and it can be very limiting for you. But when if you get in a group with some guys who are really, really pushing the envelope, you sink or swim. You force yourself to learn.
Yeah.
And I find that that's where I did my best growing as a musician, was when I had other people really challenging me to get better.
That's great advice, man. That's great advice in life in general.
Like, I think so. And the thing is, with music, with any kind of art, you can plateau, and you can get to a point where I don't sit around and practice that much anymore. I just play. And people will go, oh, what's your practice regimen? And I was like, man, I don't have one. I walk into the room and I pick up the guitar, and some days something great comes out, and other days I'm just noodling around, kind of muscle memory exercises. But it's kind of like passive musicianship rather than really active musicianship. Yeah. But there are other days where it really inspires me, and you just kind of have to do that. I just find that as you get older, it's easier to sit back and be lazy about it. Yeah. But I'm trying to force myself to be a little bit more actively interested in writing and composing and recording.
Yeah.
It's something I took a break from for a while. I had a period during the pandemic where I was kind of like, okay, well, I'm not gonna do any stuff, and then I suddenly got the itch to make another solo album, and I like that I'm at least in that state of mind now.
Yeah. And so is that where the seeds of Across the Milky Way came about? Yeah,
it was. So I've had two distinctly different sides to my career for a while, which is for years and years I was a band leader, where I always would be the guy steering the ship. And the great failure of all those early bands of mine was that we had no business sensibility. Like, I was really good at the music part of it, but then we had no business. You know, it was a disaster on the management front.
Playing for exposure.
Just, I mean, or even
the
like
infamous,
or even touring around and not having any sort of good like booking agent. You know, we would be like showing up to venues where we'd be double booked with somebody else, or they'd have our name wrong on the marquee. You know, I mean, we've all done that. But what happened in the past 15 years or so was I developed a very successful career as a sideman. And I decided, okay, well, maybe I don't want to be a band leader anymore. Maybe I'll just make my own albums, you know, for fun on the side, and then just make all my money being a touring musician. As a sideman. And I found that being a sideman, it's so much less stressful, you know, because when you're the band leader, you're having to make all the choices. Everybody hates the band leader. They're all going and having drinks after the gig, talking about you. You know? So being a sideman, it was a lot more fun and relaxing for me. So I've really enjoyed that aspect of my career for a while. But I got into a band right before the pandemic called the Bastards of Soul. And it was a bunch of guys that I've played with and known for years. And we're all songwriters. And so we had this collective, what I would call a healthy competition to try to all write songs together, but also separately, and then get them on an album. And we did 3 albums together. And during that period, I just kind of put my solo career on the back burner. I just decided that was no longer my priority. And but then that band, Bastards of Soul, ended tragically. We lost our lead singer, who was the focal point of the entire band. The entire band was built around our singer, and he passed away. And so after that, I continued doing sideman gigs. You know, I was touring with Don and touring with Mike Campbell and the Dirty Knobs. But I just had all these songs that I had written that were backlogged from really the past decade. And I made a New Year's resolution to myself that I was going to start sifting through them and figuring out if I needed to finish lyrics for certain songs, and then trying to group certain songs together and say, hey, these 10 songs it's not like these are the best 10 songs I have, but it's these 10 songs fit together. There's some thematic material here. And that's where the new album came from. It was just that I forced myself to sit down and organize my songbook. And then I found myself saying, hey, these 12 songs seem like they could maybe be an album. And I've got another one that's in the works right now. I'm about halfway done doing that, you know. So that's where I am right now. Is I've still got my sideman gigs and my day job that pays the bills, but I'm also very excited about trying to reclaim my artistic identity as Christopher.
Was that Magic Feeling always the song you knew you would put out first, or did it sort of rise to the top as you finished everything?
It was the song that kind of spearheaded the project in my mind. I had 2 songs that came kind of quickly with each other. One of them was called Snap Out, which is the very first song on the record, which is just, and it's literally how can I snap out of it? I was just kind of in a funk after the Bastards of Soul ended and the pandemic had been going on for a while. It's like, that was a weird time for everybody. You know, it was a very dark place. And so I was telling myself I needed to snap out of that kind of funk, and Magic Feeling was the first song that really happened and made me think, hey, I can do a record. And it's all about wanting to bring back that feeling of inspiration.
Yeah.
And I wrote that song in 5 minutes, that Magic Feeling. It was interesting because it was just, I found this little repetitive 3-chord riff, which is unusual for me because a lot of the songs I write tend to, I grew up liking prog rock and really complex music. And I played in some bands that were very progressive over the years, but it was very liberating to me to write a repetitive 3-chord progression. And I ad-libbed the majority of that song on the spot. I have this voice memo of how I wrote that song. And it was like 5 minutes of me literally playing this riff and singing those lyrics. And then I thought, wow, that was so spontaneous and so inspiring to just have this song come out of the blue like that it became kind of the flagship for the whole thing. And that's so yes, I did know that song was the one that made me think, okay, maybe it is time to make a record. Maybe I can build an entire record around this idea of reclaiming this part of my life that's been hibernating for quite a few years, you know.
Well, it's funny you say that about how it came about, and because it starts off with those 3 chords and very mellow, and you sing, and then at the end of the track, you know, it kind of turns into, you know, a whole band type thing.
Yeah.
But it's really cool.
I had this vision for it really pretty much from the get-go, where I thought, okay, it'd be cool to just start with this repeating thing. And it's just, I mean, it's like, it's the kind of thing that it's a loop essentially, but I did actually play it, you know, I recorded all of it here at home. And it was something where I was like, okay, well, I'm going to just record this thing for like 6 or 7 minutes and then see, you know, because I was like, I know that right at this point of the song, I want the drums to kick in. Yeah. So it was a matter of figuring out, okay, well, how can I layer this in a way that each verse that comes subsequently in the song, something new happens. It's like, okay, well, there's a piano line, or there's an organ line, or maybe there's a guitar chord that comes in. And there's one verse where it's just a stack of vocal harmonies in one speaker, you know? Yeah. And I thought that would be really cool to make the song densely layered, even though it's super simple and repetitive. There are complexities to it. It's like an onion that you just kind of keep peeling away at. And then the song totally takes off. And that was, that's exciting to me. I like the way that it's just so simple, but it builds and goes up like that, you know?
And do you like that, writing and recording it yourself? So, or do you rely on someone to come in, and do you play it for someone and go, what do you think that needs? Or
no, you know, it's funny because so whenever I do a solo album, this is my 4th solo album. So whenever I do a solo album, I always just do everything myself. I always play all the instruments myself because I like to play drums, and I like to play bass, and I like to play keys and do all this stacking of vocal harmonies and stuff. And it's kind of just a reaction to being in bands where you have to compromise. You know, I mean, the Bastards of Soul, as I said before, that was a very creative band, but there were 4 different songwriters, and we were all having to compromise. You know, it was like every record we made, I got 3 or 4 songs of mine on the, you know, I might present 20 and only 3 of them make the record. And then I've got all these leftover songs. So that was kind of what was exciting about making this new record, was that I could make all the decisions myself. You know, I knew going into it that I was going to produce it myself. I knew what I wanted. And, you know, of course, you know, when you're making a song, you sometimes you'll try something out, and then you'll listen back and go, oh, that sucks. And then you start over. There's one song on the record called California Scheming, where I started it originally just as a very kind of lazy acoustic strumming song. And I recorded the whole thing, layered all the parts that I heard in my head, and listened back to it for a couple of days. And I was just like, wow, this is really boring. This is just incredibly boring. And I thought, okay, well, maybe this song shouldn't be on the record. So, but a couple of weeks later, I was listening to a song by Jellyfish, I think, you know, the great power pop band Jellyfish.
Yeah.
And I heard this kind of big bouncing thing, and I thought, wow, what if I did California like that? What if I came in and just played it, you know, as this just completely bouncing power pop thing? And it worked. I wound up re-recording the entire song in a different key with a completely different feel. And then suddenly that was what made the song pop. And I was like, cool. So that, you know, sometimes you just have to experiment and find those things that work. But I do, I love doing solo albums where I can just play everything myself, because it's just, there's a lot of freedom in it, you know?
Yeah. I have a question about the magic feeling, and people will probably, because sometimes I fancy myself a guitar player, but not really. Are you capoed on that, or are you using
Yes.
I
Yes,
didn't
most
know
definitely.
if it was like
I've-
a Nashville strung or you were
Well,
capoed.
it's both. There's a Nashville high strung guitar, and there's a mandolin that's
I was going to
tuned.
ask about the mandolin too, but
The mandolin is tuned like a guitar. So
nice.
I tuned the mandolin to a guitar tuning essentially, and there's a high strung and there's a capoed acoustic. I'll grab acoustic and I'll show it to you. Hang on. If I can find a guitar in this room that's in tune. I was doing an interview with somebody recently where I was trying to explain a guitar piece and every one of my guitars was in an alternate tuning, and I went, sorry, not that one. Hang on, just Oh wait, this is in an alternate tuning too. Jesus.
We got to leave all this in.
Yeah. Okay, this one's at least close. Sorry, this one's at least close. So yeah, the capo for that song is all the way up high, and it's there. It is.
Yeah.
So you can see that. So it's just 3 chords. It's just it's like an E flat major 7, and then an F minor 7 to an A flat major. 3 chords the entire song.
Oh.
And but then it's just about the layers,
Mm-hmm. How do you know when a song is finished?
I will sometimes write songs and I will have the music most of the time for me, it's about the melody and the music first. I can write music and melody all day long, but it's words that are really tricky for me. I have a hard time finding something to say. It's real easy for me to write a song and be like, oh, I'm mad at somebody today, and I have tons of songs that are like that, where you're like, you have an argument with a friend or a bandmate, you're like, but trying to find something that's profound that you can actually say, or something that feels topical or important, that's hard for me. So sometimes songs will sit around, on the shelf for a while, and I'll be like, oh, I've got this great, it's, the music is awesome, the melody feels good, but I have nothing to say. So part of how this album came together was that I did force myself to finish some lyrics for songs. So that's when I have a finished lyric that I feel good about with the music, that's when I know. But even then, I could be in the studio recording a track, and I can be listening to a mix, and then I can say, God, that lyric's not working, and then I'll rewrite it and re-sing the vocal. So I can honestly say that in a lot of cases, the song is not finished until the album is pressed. Because there's always that part of me that will second guess a lyric, or and Magic Feeling's a good example. Like, I wrote 90% of those words in the actual moment that I wrote the song, 5 minutes. Yeah. But then there were a couple lines that, listening back, I was like, oh, I don't like that line. I'm going to change that. And I second guessed it at one point, where I thought, it's too repetitive. I keep saying, I miss that magic. Oh, that magic feeling. I miss that. And then I was like, so I kept trying to replace it with other words. And then I kept going, well, that's cheesy. That's not working either. And then I just went back to the kind of the original way and was saying, even though it's just repeating itself, it's like, that's kind of the point. It's like, just beating you over the head with,
Yeah, it's a great pop song.
Thank you. I wasn't sure if it would be a good single or not, because it's kind of a slow burn. I didn't know if people would dig it, if they, because in this day and age, it's so hard to get anybody to listen beyond the first 10 seconds of the song, of anything. So I did think, oh God, people are going to be bored by this. But I've gotten a lot of good feedback on it. I've been really pleasantly surprised by the response to it. And I think it's because people can maybe relate to it. It's something that I think that great songwriters write songs that people can relate to, and that's not something I've been particularly good at my whole life, and that's something I'm trying to be more cognizant of now. I want to write songs that people can understand and relate to.
Yeah.
And hopefully on that song, that connection happens,
Yeah. Well, we were talking earlier how you said that, you're really not good at the putting yourself out there and promoting it. But are you proud of this album?
Yeah, I am. I mean, the hardest thing for me is just accepting my singing voice. You know, I mean, I know that I know how to sing, and I like I said, I can stack harmonies all day long. I can harmonize with the Eagles, and it's
Yeah.
cool. But it's just, you know, singing lead and hearing myself on record. I think a lot of people have that problem where we get very insecure about our own. I mean, I don't even like listening to my speaking voice, and
We
so
have a problem with this.
Oh, horrible.
I think
So-
I hate it.
yeah. So I mean, so you can imagine how it is when you're listening to playback over and over and over of each song, and you're having to scrutinize your singing. And so that's the thing for me. So the answer is yes, I am proud of the record. I think all the I like all the songs. I sometimes cringe a little when I hear my voice, but beyond that, I do. I think it's good. You know, I don't know what people like these days, and honestly, I don't have any interest in trying to make the record sound modern or like it fits in with whatever's going on in music now, with whatever trend is happening. So when I presented the mix, I mixed the record myself at first, because I did all of it at home, and I made these preliminary mixes of what I wanted, you know, the panning to be and how I wanted the levels to be on the songs. But then I handed it off to my friend John Dufalo, he was in the Apples and Stereo, and he's in Death Ray Davies, super prolific artist, and his new project is called John Buffalo. But I had him mix the record for me, and I just said, hey, I've kind of set it the way I want it, but can you please make it sound better? like make the snare sound better, make the EQ frequencies pop. And, you know, but I did very specifically tell him, I said, I don't want it to sound like a modern record. I want it to sound like an old record. Make it sound like a 70s record.
Yeah.
And even when we, you know, did the mastering on the record, I told the mastering engineer, James Driscoll, I said, it doesn't need to be super loud. It doesn't need to be super compressed. It doesn't need to sound like one of those records where just like the second you put it on, it just goes bam. Like I want it to have some peaks and valleys and some old. I want it to sound good on vinyl. You know, I wanted it to have some warmth to it. So.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you said that, you know, you were heavily influenced with Led Zeppelin. They did the same thing. They'd have these rockers on there and then have Battle of Evermore on the same album.
Absolutely. And that's some of my favorite stuff, you know, are those acoustic songs of theirs, you know?
Yeah. My other question just now, you brought it up, your voice, your range, man, is crazy. Did you have vocal lessons as well, or is that
no? It's something it's just something I worked on for many years. When I was growing up, I was not a singer. I wanted to sing, and you know, I used to get made fun of a little bit. You know, it'd be like, "Oh, you're not a singer." I think my parents didn't really ever think that I could be a singer until my folks came and saw me one time when I was playing in a Beatles thing called Hard Night's Day here in Dallas, and I was doing the John Lennon role, and I developed this real kind of uncanny John Lennon imitation. And my dad was like, "Wow, when you sing John Lennon, you sound like you can actually sing." And I was like, but a lot of it was, you know, I mean, that sounds like a backhanded compliment, and I'm sure it was at the time. But what happened with me was I just learned how to cover so many different artists over the years. I was doing those one-man shows, and then I had some bands in college where, you know, like there would be two of us and I'd be singing. And at first I didn't even try to sing my own songs live. When I was in college, I did a duo with a friend of mine where he would sing lead and I would try to harmonize with him. But eventually I started writing songs that I thought I could sing myself. And I just gradually became a front man singing my own stuff. So it took a long time, you know. But I do feel like my voice has gotten a lot stronger over the years. And, you know, luckily I have been able to maintain my range. My range hasn't dropped, you know, and in my old age. I mean, I know it will eventually, and you know, that's just something that happens. But I try to take care of my voice as much as possible. I don't smoke, and so that has to help a little bit.
Yeah. You don't have a grindcore side project?
No, I've done plenty of songs where I really screamed and ripped up my voice, but I don't do as much of that anymore. I try not to damage it.
Yeah.
So I've done a terrible job of damaging my hearing. Unfortunately, my hearing is seriously compromised.
Yeah. I don't know how old you are, but I think everyone in our age range is
Yeah,
the same thing. It's the same way.
What'd you say?
I just turned 52, so yeah, it's I went and saw an ENT a couple of years ago, and he was like, "How have you done this to yourself?" And I was like, "Well, I've been touring with rock bands for the last 30 years." It's like, well, that explains it.
Yeah.
A lot of high end frequencies missing these days. So.
You've worked with some incredible people. So what makes a collaboration work for you? And has there ever been a collaboration that you've turned down?
I wouldn't say there's been anything I've turned down, because if there was ever any offer to work with somebody, I want to always say yes and see what happens. So the answer to your question is open mind. Open mind is the secret to collaboration. You have to be willing to listen to somebody else's opinion. So, and that's going back to like why I enjoy making solo albums, because that's the one time where I can just be me. I can totally do my thing. But, and I've done so much session work as a studio musician where you have to you can offer your opinion if they want it, but a lot of times you just have to go in there and kind of be a robot and play what the artist wants. So I do like it when there's a collaborative effort, but it is tough. Collaboration's tough because there's a lot of compromise involved, and you just have to both be equal in your give and take. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
You get what you give.
That's right.
Man, you've I could do a whole show with you asking about Mike Campbell, but I won't.
Oh, that's okay. I love talking about Mike.
You can't. You were with Henley, and then you got the Dirty Knobs gig.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
So I was touring with Don for many years in the teens, from like 2014 until 2018 or so. Whenever the Eagles reformed, we were doing Don stuff. We were really hitting. Don put out a solo album called Cass County, and we basically did a world tour that went on for several years. And the bass player in Don's band at that time with me was Lance Morrison. And Lance and I used to, whenever we would travel, Lance and I were buddies. We'd hang out, we'd go out to bars, and so we just talked all the time. And he would tell me that he was in this side project called Mike Campbell, they were just called the Dirty Knobs. It wasn't even called Mike Campbell and the Dirty Knobs at the time, because it was Mike's side project, but it was just called the Dirty Knobs. And Tom Petty was still alive, and the Heartbreakers were still his number one gig. But Lance lives in LA, and Mike's in LA, and Lance was like, "Oh man, it's a blast. We do tons of songs that Mike writes. We do tons of covers, and it's a club gig. It's just a raucous garage band club gig based around Mike Campbell." And I would always say, "I love Mike Campbell. He's one of my favorite guitar players of all time." Like literally since I was a kid, I love Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. I think Mike's one of the most tasteful players on the planet. Mike and David Gilmour, those are like two of my guys. The less is more school of melodic guitar. I think they're like the masters of melodic less is more playing. And so I would just always try to talk Lance into introducing me to Mike. So we talked about this for years. And after Tom died and Mike, signed to a BMG and started putting out records as Mike Campbell and the Dirty Knobs, they had another guitar player named Jason Sine, and Jason left the band. And when Jason left, they had a tour on the books, and Lance called me and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm wrapping up a tour with Max Weinberg, because I tour on the side with Max Weinberg, and when he's not doing Bruce." But Max had just told us that he was getting ready to go out with Bruce. and that this was kind of the end of the road for a while. So I was suddenly like without a gig. And Lance said, "Well, I'm giving Mike Campbell your number." And I went, "No fucking way." I was like, it could not have been more perfect timing for that to happen. So the next thing I knew, I was on the phone with Mike, and we were talking about guitars and talking about 60s music and talking about the Beatles and
Awesome.
just all just trying to get to know each other. And then he invited me to come out to LA and jam with him. And then one jam session, he was like, "Hey, you want to do the next show?" And I said, "Sure." And then after I did 3 shows with him, he asked me to join the band permanently. And I guess we're going on something like 4 years now. So
that's really cool, man.
It was just really wonderful because playing with Mike's a blast. It's the total opposite of something like the Eagles, because the Eagles are very structured, that's a very well rehearsed show. Whereas what Mike likes is improvisation. Mike loves to throw the set list out the window. Like, he'll make a set list of what he wants to play, and then we'll walk out on stage and he'll just look right at me and be like, "Follow me." And he'll play a completely different song that's not on the list. And the rest of us are just like, all right. And that's what we have to do. That's the beauty of playing with Mike, is he loves to be spontaneous and to do the unexpected. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, him being one of your favorite guitar players, I heard him refer to you as his secret weapon. How does that feel, man?
It's very kind of him to say that stuff. I think he likes the fact that I'm not scared. I think he likes the fact that I don't get nervous around him or treat him any sort of, we're just guitar players, and we've become, he's my boss, of course, but we've also become very good friends. And that's something that, I think if you're going to play music with somebody, you've got to have that rapport. You've got to have that kind of camaraderie. And Mike loves 2 guitar bands. And also, Mike has had a long, wonderful musical relationship with Ben Montench, with the great Ben Montench.
Yeah.
So Mike loves keyboards also. He loves having keyboards. And because I'm also a keyboard player, as soon as he saw me playing piano backstage one day, he came back and was like, "Oh man, I didn't know you played piano." This song, and then we started, he was like, "Oh, do you know God Only Knows? Oh, do you know,
that's cool.
Beatles songs?" And so and then suddenly it became, well, let's start incorporating the keyboards into the knobs. So, so we have all kinds of musical things we can bounce off one another: vocal harmonies, keyboard parts, dual, intertwining guitar lines. So that's been really great. And the fact that he encourages me is awesome, because then we can get really creative. Like, he doesn't really tell me what to play. I mean, sometimes he'll have some direction when we're in the studio, but a lot of times on stage, it's just we just get there face to face and see what happens.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, it's a dream come true to play with him. And it's also, I obviously, Joe Walsh was one of my biggest guitar heroes growing up too. So to play with Joe and to feed off of his energy is also really, it's just surreal, hard to explain.
When you got the gig, did you decide that, like, how many guitars do you have out there?
So
here come the nerd questions.
Yeah. So I've got about a dozen of my own guitars out there. Stuart Smith, who was the previous guitar player, who's now retired, he had probably 20 of his guitars out there that he decided to leave because he was just like, "Hey, would you have any interest in playing some of these?" Particularly, he has some of these Ernie Ball double neck guitars that, the double neck is what we use for Hotel California. And so I was like, "Oh, well, I would love to, not have to spend $10,000 and buy my own double neck, so, or make the Eagles buy me one, or whatever, has to be done there." So it was nice to have the option of using some of that stuff of his. But so between my dozen guitars and my amps and pedals, and then, the other amps and pedals, and then some of the guitars that Stuart decided to leave, it's a hell of a collection. And Joe and Vince have got, I mean, between me, Joe, Don, Deacon, and Vince, we probably have 100 guitars
Oh my
backstage.
gosh.
Wow.
It's pretty. It's a lot of guitars for sure.
How did you adjust to no amps on the stage?
This is the first time I've ever had to do that. I mean, I've used amp modelers in studios before, but I've never done gigs without an amp like right there behind me, where you can actually feel the amp.
Yeah.
So that took a little getting used to. And I know that was really tough for Joe as well, because Joe was just like, what do you mean I can't have an amp on stage? That's crazy. So that took some adjustment for sure. But I'm used to it now. I've been using in-ear monitors for a while. I mean, if I play smaller shows back home, if I do club gigs or something, I use a floor wedge, and I like that. But there are no floor wedges at the Sphere. There are no amplifiers. So we had to get used to stereo in-ears. Getting everything from the ears as opposed to the amps and the wedges. So that was an adjustment for sure. But all our amps are, you've seen how that is. So all of our amps are they're in cases in another room behind the stage.
Yeah, yeah. I know cats would come out to see the show and visit the band, and they'd always come and go, "Where are the amps?" And they'd come under the stage and just be, there's amps blaring back there.
Yeah, we can turn them up nice and loud, but we still use amps. So
yeah, but
I don't think guys like Joe Walsh would ever consider not using. I mean, dude, Joe's got hundreds of amps. Like he's not gonna. I don't think Joe's ever gonna be. I don't think he's ever gonna want to do the Fractal Audio or the Kemper.
Yeah. Let's throw Joe on a Kemper and use the presets. Let them use the presets that they come with.
we're old school guitar players, man. We like to turn our tube amps up loud and get some noise out of them.
When you're playing with the Eagles, are you more nervous? I mean, I don't want to make you nervous. Maybe you never thought of these things, but are you more nervous of making a mistake and having the reaction from the band or from the crowd?
Well, honestly, the crowd, because we all, we're all singing live, we're all playing live. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to hit wrong notes. There's going to maybe be a dropped drumstick or, a guitar chord that's on the wrong fret or whatever. Those things happen. And there's not any sort of, I mean, I think that if I were to make consistent mistakes every night, somebody would probably be like, "Hey, dude, you all right? You need to learn. Do you need to learn the song?" They might, but that doesn't happen really, because we all have, we're all pros, and these songs are, I mean, for them, they've been doing it forever. These songs are in my DNA. I mean, I've been playing these songs since I was 14 years old in my bedroom, so I instinctively know how it goes. But I will say that it does make me nervous to play in front of 20,000 fans, because they know every note to every single solo.
Yeah.
And, when I'm having to sing my parts and I'm having to play lead guitar, if I hit a bad note, I know that the fans notice, and there's a little bit of nervousness there, because it's like, oh God, is this going to be a viral video? Eagles guitar player tanks guitar solo, But I try not to worry about that stuff, I mean, I'm going to make mistakes on stage from time to time, and as long as I'm not a consistent problem within the mix of the band, I think everything's cool. But no, it's great. The atmosphere is great, and everybody in the band has been very welcoming to me, and the fans have actually been very welcoming too. I was worried in the beginning that there might be a little backlash to Stuart leaving and a new guy coming in, but everybody had, of course, wishes Stuart the best of health and his future. And even though I'm sure everybody misses Stuart, people have been very kind to me, and I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, that's great, man. What's it like being next to Joe Walsh and hearing that Joe Walsh chukka? And has he taught you any talk box tricks, man?
Yes. Actually, he and I. So we did a lot of kind of talk boxing early on. We were doing the song called "Those Shoes," which required Joe and I to play talk boxes in harmony. And we swapped the set around a little bit. So we're now, that one's out of the set now, and we're doing Best of My Love instead. And I imagine that when we come back in the fall and do more shows in September, we'll probably mix up the set list again. I don't know what it's going to be, but we were doing talk box stuff on those shoes, and Joe had tons of great tips. He's a master of the talk box, and I've used them before, but it's not something that I just had a ton of experience with. So it was all about the way
he's the self-proclaimed talk box fairy.
Yeah, he was great with that, and I really, really enjoyed getting to sit there and work face to face with him on those bits. I wish we would bring that song back so we could do it some more.
Yeah.
Hopefully we will at some point. But yeah, it's a blast playing with Joe because he's just got so much energy. He loves to play, and Joe's another one of those guys that, I played with him before at some of his Vets Aids events where I did Vets Aids with him in 2018. And then we did it again in 2019, where it was essentially Don's band, but we were backing Joe for one of Joe's solo sets. And when Joe does one of his solo shows, he loves to improvise and loves to jam. So that's another thing that's very cool is most of what we do in the Eagles is very structured. Those songs by heart. Everybody knows what the guitar solo is supposed to be, but Joe gets a little, there's a lot of songs where Joe gets to stretch out and improvise, and it's fun to play off of him and react to where he's going, because it's not the same every time. Joe is always kind of the wild card with a guitar solo. Sometimes it might go on an extra minute or two, and then it's like, all right, well, watch Joe.
Which Vets Aid did you play with Joe?
I played with him in 2018 at the one in Tacoma, and then I played with him in 2019 at the one in Houston.
I was there. I was working for Jason Isbell.
Yeah, okay, I remember. Yeah, Jason came up at the end, and we jammed with us at the very end on. So when it was Billy Gibbons and Sheryl Crow.
Yeah, it was a great show.
Yeah. So I was there with. So that night I played with the Doobie Brothers. So we were the backing band for the Doobie Brothers and for Joe Walsh. So I did the Doobies and Joe back-to-back sets.
Yeah.
And those are fun, man. Those were so much. It's always so much fun to play with those guys. The Doobies were great.
I love the Doobie Brothers.
Yeah, me too.
Well, man, you have this album coming out. It's coming out today, May 9th.
No. Oh, yes. Okay. May 9th. Sorry. I was about to be like, no, it's May 9th.
Well, this will be released on May 9th, and it's coming out. It's going to be released. The tracks I've heard from it are great, man.
Thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it. So.
Like I said, we don't know each other. We've only known each other through text, but I walked into the tone shop a few months back, and Tommy said, "Do you know Chris Holt?" And I said, "No, I don't." And he looked both ways, and he goes, "He's going to be in the Eagles." And literally, I left the tone shop. I was in Dallas visiting, and I was in the car, and Irv texted me, and he said, "Can you talk?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Hey, one of my artists, Chris Holt's got a new album coming out in May. Also, would you, and so that was really, all of a sudden, your name was everywhere.
It's funny because the same exact thing happened with me, with your name. I think it was Tommy who had said, "Do you know Bernie?" And then Irv had said, "Do you know Bernie?" Well, he's got this podcast, and he's with you too, and he's been and he's done the Sphere. Like, you guys should talk. Like, he told me immediately who you were, and then of course we're texting, and I'm sorry we missed connection in Jersey that night. That was
man.
Hopefully next time we have a chance to see each other in person.
The book thing was great, and for him to play the best of everything, which was it's one of my favorite Tom Petty songs.
Mine too. I was really glad that he included that in there. I was very happy to have those songs. The book tour thing was really fun. That was a cool, very loose.
Yeah.
I mean, Mike's got so many stories, and his book is so great. I'm
saving the book. We have a European tour coming up with Duran. I'm saving the book for while I'm on tour.
Well, you'll love it, man. The book's great. I read the whole thing, and I was really proud of him. It's a great book.
I know, man. Well, Chris, dude, we really appreciate you taking time. I know
Thank you.
you're busy with all your fame.
It has certainly been busy recently, and I'm
Yeah.
expecting that it'll taper off at some point. But I've got a big summer coming up. I got this album coming out. I got Dirty Knobs tour starting in June. Back to the Sphere with the Eagles in September.
Yeah.
And I don't even really I don't have any time to play my own music at this point. We've got an album release show at this place called the Kessler Theater here in Dallas on May 16th, which is a week from now. And we're doing this one show. I've got this full band of ringers put together to go out there and blast this album for one night. And then who knows when I'll get to do it again. I would love to tour if there was a demand for it, if there was an audience for it, but we'll just kind of have to wait and see. And in the meantime, I'm making a follow-up record. So maybe there'll be some chance to get out and tour some shows behind that. But I got my day jobs to consider first and foremost.
Well, Jeff did this show, so I'm a big fan of Jeff and the Kessler and Longhorn, all that stuff he's involved in.
Jeff is an absolute treasure. He's a Dallas treasure.
He needs to be protected at all costs.
I agree.
Well, man, thank you again for doing this. Our podcast, it's called Is Breakfast Included? If we were having breakfast, what would you have?
Oh, man, give me some eggs Benedict or give me some, it depends what's on the menu because sometimes I could be very indulgent, But I'd maybe some, I would go with a good eggs Benedict dish. That sounds good.
Coffee or anything?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm due for some coffee right now. Yeah. I usually have at least 2 cups first thing in the morning just to turn my brain on. Yeah. But then by mid-afternoon, I need some more coffee. So.
Nice.
Oh, I don't know where you're staying in Vegas, but there's a place called Blueberry Hill Diner, Blueberry Hill Cafe. It's on Flamingo, straight up from the Platinum.
Okay.
But
Blueberry Hill, I can remember that. That's an easy one to remember.
I've done 2 residencies in Vegas, and they always get my money.
Okay, well, I'm going to keep that in mind next time I'm there. So,
right on, man.
Awesome. Dude, thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate you.
No, thank you for doing it, man. I know you're busy, but we really appreciate having you on, man. And wish you nothing but luck.
Well, thanks so much, man. If we're ever in the same town, you ever come into Vegas or whatever, come see the Dirty Knobs or check out the album and all that.
I think I'm going to come out for one of the September Eagles shows.
Please do. Let me know when you hit me up, man. We'll hang. We'll go to Blueberry Hill together.
All right, brother.
Nice.
Sounds
all
good.
Right. Thanks, man.
You.
Take care, you guys.
Right on. Christopher Holt. What a great guy, right? Don't you love it when amazing things happen to great, humble people? Man, I love that. You can find out more about Chris on @ChristopherHoltMusic on Instagram. You can go to his link tree from there. You can order the vinyl. There's 2 limited edition colors of his vinyl Across the Milky Way album. And if you're in Dallas, next Friday, May 16th, he's doing an album release show at the Kessler Theater in Dallas. Make sure you check it out. It's his one and only show before he goes back off with the Eagles. Check it out. While you're online, go to isbreakfast.com. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram from there. Rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts. Go subscribe to our YouTube. Make sure you check out the older interviews. It's a lot of good ones, guys. And while you're there, pick up a shirt. All right, guys, I want to thank Chris for his time. I want to thank Lisa for everything. I am done. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next week.